I'm very happy that you are here, Bishop Mariann, to give this lecture, this speech, this address. It was a joy to listen to your sermon yesterday, and we look forward to hearing what you want to share with us now. So please, welcome.
Thank you. Morgon. Jag var väldigt glad att vara här med er. Jag talar väldigt lite svenska, men jag förstår mer. Jag vill lära mig, så ni måste prata svenska med mig. Men inte för mycket och inte hela tiden. I've had Swedish in my ear all of my life. My mother immigrated from Sweden when she was in her 20s. And she went to New York and was a physical therapist and was teaching children who had polio how to walk again. She met my father and they married. Their marriage didn't last. I have an older sister who is 3 years older than I, and I was born and their marriage ended. And the great mystery of our family is why she didn't return with us to Sweden. And we talked about that many times as I was a child. And each time I felt the answer was a bit different. So I'm not sure that she herself knew. But she always brought us back. And as some of you know, she died recently, and we brought her remains to be buried in the family churchyard in Förslöv, which is near the summer home where my Swedish family often spends their summers. So it's a great joy to be here. I was one of those immigrant children that refused to learn my mother's tongue, my mother's language, so I have great regret for, and so it is a goal of mine now. But I will speak to you in English so that my vocabulary might be a bit broader. I've been asked to speak to you about a topic that I have written quite a bit about in the last few years, and that which is about courage, about being brave, and in particular for those of us who are followers of Jesus, how following him as best we can teaches us how to be brave. And so before I do anything else, I'd like for you to think for just a moment and maybe talk among yourselves, one or two people, what you think bravery is. What is courage for you? And what, if anything, keeps you from being brave? So just take a moment, just talk among yourselves, just give yourselves a definition, and you can speak in Swedish, and just talk among yourselves. Good luck. Yeah? I could bring you back. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways to think about courage, to think about being brave, and perhaps over different conversations throughout the day we can share even more broadly some of the things that have occurred to you and certainly have occurred to me. I often think of children, very young children, when you think of them as they're learning to do things they've never done before. Do you know? Remember, if you watch a child who's just learning to stand up or to walk, you see the look on their face, like, I have never done this before and I am doing it right now. And then they immediately fall over, right? Do you know? Or if you have children that have gone off to school and you see them walk up the steps to the school for the first time, or perhaps you remember what that was like for you, or going to university for the first time. So often it's crossing a threshold of something you've never done before, or that you're not sure that you can do, or that is something you're absolutely certain that you cannot do, but somehow you're being asked to do it anyway. Right? So think now about the long history of our scriptures, of the Bible, and all the times in the Jewish and the Christian stories where people are afraid. And someone says to them, don't be afraid. Right? And I never hear that as a scolding, like you silly person, don't be afraid. But it's more, don't be afraid. It's all right. And I hear that as not like, it's okay to be afraid, but it's going to be all right. Or I will be with you. You know, all of those reminders of Scripture. Or when someone is being summoned to do something truly brave. And it's as if God knows that if we're going to do that, we need to know that we're not alone, right? Or that even if we are called to do something and we know in advance that we're going to fail, right? That we're being asked to do it anyway. Do you know? And that is one of, for me, of all the experiences of faith that I have had in my life, these are the ones that are anchored inside me. So when people ask me why do I believe, or why am I a person of faith, it's less because I've memorized a series of doctrines, but it's that experience of having been beckoned or encouraged or summoned to do or to do something or not to do something. In either situation, feeling like I'm on the threshold of something, and God or Jesus is with me there. Do you know? So as I speak today, I hope that you will call to mind some of your own experiences, or that you've observed or admired in other people. Because in some ways, for me at least, this is what we have to offer the world. All the assurances of forgiveness and love and life eternal, but a way of being in the world that allows us to be brave, right? To do, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, to do the very thing you think you cannot do. Right, and for me, one of the a couple of assumptions that I want to make sure that I say is that first of all, let's be honest. There's a lot about the world that we have very good reasons to be afraid. Right, it's not that being afraid is silly or naive. Right, there are real dangers, and we would be foolish or even not worth listening to if we minimized the real risks of being a human being on this planet, right? And fear can easily and appropriately overtake us. So fear is one way that we survive, and I want to underscore that. But I also think it's then equally important that we understand how we learn so that we can cultivate and practice the skills and the postures of courage. And to hear in the words of Scripture the assurance that God is with us. So, just again, to say that Jesus teaches us to be brave or to have courage assumes that this is something we can learn and practice, and that we don't have to feel brave all the time. So, when have you experienced this? The first time I can remember consciously experiencing this call to be brave was when I was 17 years old. And I won't go into a lot of the details here, but instead share with you some of the aspects of that experience that have stayed with me for my entire life. The first thing to know about that experience is that I did not want to do what I felt I was being asked to do. I didn't want to do it. But it wasn't also something that I felt I had, and I didn't feel like it was an option. Like I felt whatever was happening internally, I felt like I needed to do it. It was a summons, it was a command almost internally. The second thing to know about it is that all of the adult authority figures in my life at that time did not think it was a good idea, except for one, my mother. Many of the authority figures in my life were the people in the church where I had first come to accept Christ in a personal way. So some of these authority figures were ministers, and one in particular. Others were members of the faculty of my high school who wanted me to stay and finish my high school where I was living with my father in Colorado. And the others were my friends, whom I had become very close to. Right? So all this communal support for me to do what I wanted to do, which was to stay where I was. And then there was this inner feeling that I needed to go and return to live with my mother. And what I remember about that is how frightened I was and how exhilarated I was at the same time, right? And I was learning internally at that young age that sometimes the authority within needs to be listened to, even when there are others who are saying otherwise. Now, I loved all of these people. These were not people I was rebelling against. I loved them all. But I had this very real sense that my survival depended upon my going to return to my mother. I also knew, and this was even more, it's sort of why I'm here today, I also knew that I was in some ways rejecting part of the Christian worldview that had formed me in those early formative years. Because this was an expression of Christianity that had a tight circle around it. We were the ones who accepted Jesus in a particular way, and it was our responsibility to convince others to experience Jesus in just this way. And the number of people who were not part of that circle was very large, and included people like my mother, who was attending, God forbid, an Episcopal church, right? And I say that jokingly, but I mean that in all seriousness. There was just no way that it would be all, there was real concern that I would, the phrase in English is backslide into sin and there was a part of me at that age that just said that makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I wasn't interested in arguing with the people I loved, and I didn't need to, that wasn't but I just knew something wasn't right. And so and the reason I go back to that experience over and over again is because I remember so vividly what it felt like inside. And so when I have that experience again, and they don't happen very often, right? I'm 65, I can count on one hand the times I've had that kind of clarity, right? But when something like that happens, I listen, because it says to me, maybe each of you know this, there's a way that God speaks to you that is particular to you. And it may not happen very often, but when it does, it's like, pay attention, right? So it became we would say in English, an archetypal experience. It became really part of my story. And it makes me listen for those same echoes in other stories. Do you know? And so all of the call stories in the scripture, for example, the resonance of that, you really begin to understand why there are certain patterns that happen. And maybe not the same in each life, but that we have them in our life story. And it's good to know what they are, right? Now, as I got older, I had the kind of life in my teens and 20s where things happened very fast. You know, a lot of things happened very fast, and I did a lot of moving around. And so I began to associate faithfulness and excited living, or the kind of life I was meant to live, by a lot of movement, right? And then when I was in my early 30s, Paul and I were married at this point. We both had jobs. We had 2 small children. We had a house. And all of a sudden, life began to be very slow. I was having my, quarter life crisis. And, but in the sense, I didn't know what to do with the slowness. I didn't know how to live a slow life. And I remember once I was in Sweden, actually, with my, visiting our family in near Vevistrand, near Ängelholm in southern Sweden. And I was walking with our young son, and here we were in Europe, and I just wanted to travel Europe. I wanted to do everything you could possibly do while you were traveling in Europe. And my friends who didn't have children yet were having these great and exciting lives, right? And I was walking down the path to look at a sheep with our little boy, who just wanted to look at the sheep and the horse across the way for the entire morning. And what has that to do with courage? And I learned, and I've continued to learn since then, that there's another way of being brave, which is accepting the life that you have. Yeah? And living it deeply. And perhaps sometimes staying where you are and going deeper. I didn't know very much about stability growing up. Lots of movement, lots of drama. And this was completely different. And I had this sense, and it wasn't the same call, but it was the same experience, the same crisis, if you will, that said, you are now to learn this. And if you can't rise to this, if you can't love your little boy, what does it matter if you see the whole world, right? So another way of learning to be brave, but no one else would have said to me, oh, look at her. Oh, isn't she the brave one? There she is, looking at her little boy with the sheep, right? But at the moment, it was probably one of the most courageous things I've ever done. Does that make sense? And I had an echo of that in these last 5 years, because I wound up being the primary caregiver for our mother, who had lived all of her life an incredibly healthy and independent life, just as healthy and as independent as you can imagine. And then suddenly, illness overtook her. And because she never thought she would get sick, and she didn't believe in being sick, she was utterly unprepared. And so everything changed immediately. And I'm a bishop. I'm a very important person. I have this very busy life and these obligations. And there was my mother, who needed my care. And more than my care, she needed my attention. And it was God saying to me, if you can't care for your mother, what does the rest matter? So do you hear courage sometimes to act and to do and to speak? But in the whole of life, those moments can come and teach us very different things. And some of those moments where we feel the call, others may see us. Many have said to me, oh, you were so brave when you did, the sermon. But in the course of a life, the real acts of courage, most of the acts of courage are very private, aren't they? No one else sees them but you, God, a few people. And those are the moments that shape our character. Those are the moments that help us trust the voice, the ways that we are called to be brave, right? In the time I have left, I'd like to talk about a different kind of experience of being brave. And this is, these are the moments that come to us, and we don't have a lot of time to think. A situation arises, and there is an immediate need to respond. Or, I've had this happen to me also, you've been struggling for a long time with something, and suddenly clarity comes and you know exactly what, and it becomes very clear in the moment that something must be done, right? I was thinking about this a lot a few years ago, and there's an expression in English that captures the essence of it, and it comes from the American game of baseball. So if any of you familiar with baseball, but baseball in many ways, it's a team sport, but it's also a very lonely sport if you happen to be the one who has the bat and is going up to bat, right? Because it's you, the pitcher, and the ball, right? And when you are on the team, you're assigned your place in what they call the lineup before the game. And so it really doesn't matter how you feel in a given moment when it's your turn to go up to bat, right? It's just your turn. So you step up to the bat and you swing, right? And so there's this image of like, okay, whether or not you feel prepared, whether or not it's a good day for you, whatever, and there you are, and the ball comes, and you have to decide in that moment what you're going to do. So stepping up to the plate is an expression that has carried over into other understandings of life. I tried, because as Paul said, we live in a bilingual context with Spanish. I tried to find a similar phrase in Spanish when I was preaching about this in Spanish, and I couldn't. If I said step up to the plate in Spanish, it meant literally stepping onto a plate, right? And I don't know if the same thing would be true in Swedish. I couldn't find one in Swedish. There is the, and you have this in Swedish as well. In Spanish, it's coger el toro por los cuernos, right? Att torturen vid hornen, right? Like that? Att ta tjuren. Something, grab the bull by the horns, we would say in English, right? My favorite in Spanish, this is just all an aside, my apologies, but I've had such fun with this. The one parallel in Spanish that I found, which doesn't translate into English at all, but it's ponerle el cascabel al gato. And what it literally means is to put a bell on a cat. But it's that same idea of like, okay, here's a moment, and we must act. And I'll just give you an example. This is one of my favorite examples that I came across in a story. There's a Jesuit priest in California. His name is Gregory Boyle, and I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an amazing man. He leads the largest, most successful program to address gang violence in the country, perhaps in the world, to help gang members leave their gangs and find a new way of life, and even help gang members of opposite gangs who have spent their lives hating each other and even killing each other find ways to live together in their neighborhoods. Right? It's a very, very successful program. And when he talks about when he first started, going back all the way into the 1980s, and he was a parish priest, Catholic priest, serving in the Dolores Mission Church neighborhood, which has the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. In that time, as many as 1,000 people were dying each year due to gang-related violence. And Boyle was convinced that something had to be done. And his first idea was to establish an alternative school, middle school, for young adolescent boys. And the best location to do this was the parish convent, where 6 elderly Belgian nuns lived. And so he decided he would approach the nuns. And he asked them, hey, would you all mind, moving out so we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And the nuns looked at Boyle, and they looked at each other, and they said, sure. Yes. In that moment, they hadn't had a chance to think about it. In that moment, with one word, they did their part to begin one of the most transformational ministries in the country, right? And I believe that sometimes, not often, but sometimes, like those nuns, we make some of our most important decisions seemingly on the spot. It's bypassing our conscious thought, the account of how we feel in a moment. A situation presents itself, and we respond. It's more akin to instinct. Athletes would talk about this as muscle memory. Or musicians, they're not thinking anymore. Those of you who are musicians, you're just moving in a different way. Now, looking back, you might say, well, I've actually been preparing for this moment for a very long time, right? Musicians don't just start playing like that, but in the moment. And so, drawing from Scripture and from life, I'd like to explore a few different ways that we can experience that moment. Okay, because I think there are many different ways. And the first one, maybe our favorite, is when we do this from a sense of confidence and clarity. Like, I am ready for this. Yes, I can do this. This especially occurs to me when someone is asking me to do something, and it is something that they have no ability to do whatsoever, and I can do with relative ease, just because of what I know how to do. And so my saying yes is a relatively easy thing for me to do, but it makes their life so much easier, which is how I feel when I bring my car, say, to the mechanic, or when I ask my husband to fix something that I have no idea how to fix, and it takes you 5 minutes, right? Because of the just difference. So yes, I can step in. So when a moment like that happens, it's like, yes, or I'm ready. I can do this. And in Scripture, I think of Jesus, especially a couple of moments in Jesus' life. One, that story from the Gospel of Luke at the very beginning. It's Luke chapter 4, when he goes into the synagogue and he's asked to read the Scriptures. And he pulls out the scroll and he reads from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives, to let the oppressed go free, right? So he's reading this, right? And as he reads the text, as you know, he knows, right? He knows. Maybe he knew all along, I don't know, but in that moment, he knows. This is. And if you read a little bit further in the story, at first everyone's really happy, and then they say, wait a minute, aren't you Joseph's boy? What? And they want to throw him off a cliff, right? It doesn't matter. The praise, the ridicule, it doesn't matter anymore, because he knows. Right? So when we know, I can do this. The end of his life, totally different circumstance, when he is before Pilate, right? And they have that exchange. Again, he knows. So he's not arguing anymore. He's just, I'm here. I'm ready for this. So that's one way we can experience the call. It doesn't happen to me very often, to be honest. And it's not, but it is, I think, important. And sometimes people will say things like, I've been preparing my whole life for this. I can say yes to this now. I've had, as many of you had, the privilege of being with people who are in fact ready to die. Right? And it's a kind of courage that is extraordinary. It's okay. So that's one way, the moment that... Now, on the other end of the experiential spectrum, there are those times when we do not feel ready at all. The moment has come, and it's like, you are mistaking me for somebody who can do this. And I think we can take great courage here from our scriptures, right? Because isn't that the normative response of everyone? Moses, can't do it, Lord, I stutter. Jeremiah, sorry, I'm only a boy. Right? Mary, how can this be? I've never been with a man. Isaiah, woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, right? What are some others? Peter, depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful, right? It's almost like that's the normative experience, right? We are being asked to do something, and in the moment, our first response is no. Right? But it doesn't seem to matter. Right? How we feel in that moment doesn't seem to matter. So I wonder what that says to us. That it's normal to feel unprepared, to feel inadequate, that there is always a gap, or almost always a gap, between what we feel we can do and what we must do, and that part of the faith journey is to step into that space. What do we learn by stepping into the things that we feel we cannot do? There's the wonderful feeling of having God meet us in the gap with what's needed, right? Think of the story of the loaves and the fish, for example. There was a completely inadequate offering for a multitude of people, but they were asked to offer it anyway. What do you have? They offer it, and the abundant. How many of you had that experience, right? I think of it on Sunday mornings when I preach and someone says, and it was an okay sermon, but someone comes up to me afterwards and says, oh, that was exactly what I needed to hear. And they say what they thought I said, and it wasn't what I said at all, right? You know that feeling, right? And so you realize that, okay, there is something that happens between our lips and their ears, and God shows up there, thank God. So that keeps me going. That's enough to keep me going for my lifetime. Just those moments of, okay, I don't have to be responsible for everything. I just have to do my part. And so that's one experience, a great faith experience. There's another one, however. It's much more painful. And that's stepping into that gap of what we are asked to do that we cannot do. And we step into it, and God doesn't show up. Or at least not in the way that we wish. And we fail. And it hurts. It hurts us, or it hurts other people. And we have to learn something from that experience. Right? And I don't know what to say about that, except it seems to be part of it seems to be necessary. In the human life, just developmentally speaking, we learn from our failures. But isn't it amazing? I have a hard time with this because I always associate failure with failure. Like I have failed, and that's somehow bad. Or if I had only tried harder, if I had prepared more, if I had done something else, all of which could be true, of course. But in that moment, I failed nonetheless. And what do I learn from that? What do I take from that allows me to maybe try again later on? Or to have greater solidarity with failure? I don't know. I just know that part of that stepping into this moment and knowing that you may in fact fail is also part of it. That God doesn't always rescue us with the big act of grace, at least not in that moment. But it requires faithfulness from us anyway, right? Trying to think if see what I wrote down here, if I have an example that There's an artist in the US, his name is Neil Gaiman, and he wrote an essay for other artists. And I think he was maybe even speaking to a graduating class of some art school. And what he basically said to them was, you know, in the beginning when you have an artistic gift or passion, what you produce in the beginning isn't very good. And it doesn't meet your own vision of what's inside your head, of what you want to produce. You have this vision and then you have what you produce, and it's just not very good. And he says to them, most people stop there, right? And I know that feeling. I tried all sorts of things I wasn't good at and I just quit, right? But he said the real test of an artist is if you keep going, right? Because if you keep going, you eventually, he says, you get better. So it's not a churchy faith vision, but it's a similar idea that, you know, this is like, we're learning, right? These are postures of learning and also postures of humility, right? So that's the other way. So here's the moment I'm ready for it. Here's the moment I am not ready for it. And Christ teaches us to trust in a new way, and we'll be given what is needed, or we will fail and learn what we must learn from that, right? And then there's, I would say, a third way. This is my personal favorite because it helps me personally so much. And this is when, how can I describe it? This is when I'm going about my life and I become utterly self-absorbed, right? Preoccupied with all sorts of things that are just increasingly occupying my attention. And they're usually very small things. And I start worrying, or the image I have is I'm just sort of going down a hole, sort of this downward spiral of my own contradictions, my sins, my depression, you name it, you know, all those things, right? The things I'd rather you didn't know about me because I'd rather you didn't know that about me. There I am. And then something happens, and I hear an invitation to do something for someone else that lifts me out of all of this and puts me over here, where I am not the center of attention at all. In fact, I am a bit player in someone else's larger narrative. And I get to do something that just takes me out of this and puts me here. And this life is the life of creativity and love and connection and joy, and it lifts me. And so part of it is that experience is so lovely. But the other part, which I find even more gratifying, is that surely God sees me in all of this, right? God is watching me in all of this. Jesus is there with me. And nothing is being fixed, right? He's just gently taking me up and saying, why don't we leave all this here for now and go over here and do this? That will all be waiting for you. It doesn't go away, right? But it allows me to have a relationship with it that is, even as I'm talking about it, right, it's not all of me. Because while I'm in it, it feels like it's all of me, right? Or I'm content or stuck there. And I'm not stuck there. And it gives me a sense of God's graciousness, of Jesus' compassion that says, yeah, I know, but I could really use you over here now. Could we do this together? And it can be anything, right? And the story in Scripture that gets this for me the most is Jacob. The story of Jacob. Because he's such a scoundrel, do you know? He's such a devious person. And he is self-serving most of the time in his life. But God seems to know all of that about Jacob, and from time to time just lifts him up and puts him over here and has him do this thing and puts him over here. And then that amazing story where Jacob is wrestling with the stranger, you know, and he's wounded. That's happening right as he's about to face the brother that he had cheated twice, right? As a young sibling, and betrayed. And he's about to meet him, and he's wrestling all night with this stranger, comes away wounded, and then reconciles with his brother. So it's a way of saying that that there are these moments where we can be brave, if you will, but it's really just being helped by God to focus on where God would have us go. And I guess in all these ways, I find not only am I learning, but I'm growing in my confidence that my God is real, that the messiness of my life is not all there is, and that there are times when, in all the different ways I see in Scripture, we can find parallels or ways of going deeper into our own life story. It also helps me listen to others as they're going through life, do you know? And asking questions or encouraging them, allowing them to see. So I want to stop here, but because I'd love to know if any of you have any questions or thought. But let me see if there's one more thing I wanted to. Just hold on. Okay, let me say this. Part of what I'm trying to communicate to you is acceptance of who we are and our imperfect, incomplete understandings, and our woefully inadequate actions, and our rather small place in the overall scheme of things, right? But in the midst of all of those truths, it is also true that there is a larger spirit at work that invites us in and invites us to join in the creative, reconciling work of God. And so we don't have to take on everything. We just have to take on our response to that call. And we don't have to know or understand the ultimate significance of anything. What we need to do is to be willing to learn and to grow and dare to meet God in the moment where we feel the call. So I hope, as I've been speaking, that you have had some connection to your own story. I think there's a tremendous satisfaction that comes when we take our turn, right? When we step up. When we have some sense that we're fulfilling some deeper purpose, and when we at last can accept ourselves, even in our brokenness, and dare to believe that we're called to do something big for something good. So when it's your turn, you know, step up, pull the bull by the horn, put a bell on that cat, and trust that you are the one in that moment summoned by the God who loves you, and sustained by the one who promises to be with you always. Thank you.
They are coming once again. One more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For what you have said. And if there are some questions that you would like to ask now, that's possible. I know that you will have groups for a group discussion later on, so but one or two questions perhaps. Yes. Please join us here. This is Peter.
Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for an insightful and very, meaningful and touching speech. I was thinking, I was talking to Linda here, about the definition of courage, bravery, and. I was wondering if you could expand, how do you discern between bravery on one hand and foolhardiness and just ego?
Thank you.
How do you discern between courage, bravery on one hand, and foolhardy and ego on the other? Most of the time, I do it badly. Because the energies are so similar. They're very similar. The sense of urgency, the sense of importance, right? It's incredibly confusing. And so I think a couple of pieces that catch my attention are when I feel a bit of dread. It's a different feeling than ego. The other that I've learned in my later years, which has been quite helpful to me, is I ask other people. I try not to discern alone, because it doesn't mean I always listen to what they say. I mean, I listen, but I let people give me their thoughts and their perspectives. And sometimes it changes completely how I ultimately discern. And sometimes it helps to clarify. So those are the two things that I think of. But the surefire one, I think, is to talk to other people, particularly people who know you or who stand to be influenced by what it is you decide to do. And again, it may not change it. The example I gave when I was 17, if I had listened only to them, I would have made a very different choice. But I think it's a good test. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, at the back. This is Anders.
Anders.
Thank you. You woke my attention about thinking about courage in self-esteem and självkänsla och i självförtroende.
Emotional feeling.
Emotional feeling about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And self-confidence.
Yes, because I can cut down a tree. I can be a bit nervous about it, but I can go. That's good. And when it comes down, it's a fantastic feeling because of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And to handle the chainsaw. But to have courage there, you can enlarge all the time. But when about the self-esteem, to have courage there. So I'm going to think about this. I'm going to work it in my life and try to see can I get the courage in my self-esteem? Yes, some response.
Different kinds of courage.
Oh, right. Right. Well, it's interesting. I talked about that inner experience, but I distinguish that from my feelings, because my feelings are they are quite varied, and I often don't feel brave when I am persuaded that I must act brave, and self-confidence is something that comes and goes for me. So I try not to place too much on that. What I was trying to describe, and perhaps not well, is having less confidence in myself and more confidence in God, right? And more confidence in the relationship that accepts and works through even all of my feelings. And sometimes I might have an overinflated sense of myself, right? And sometimes I might feel like I'm worthless. Either one of those, I don't think are particularly, God doesn't seem particularly interested in either one of those, right? And so it's similar, but it's a different place to hold the confidence. And I don't know if that's helpful at all, but it does give me a different sort of confidence because it's not about me as much anymore, although it resides in me. Having said that, there are some things I'm very confident about because I've just done them a lot, right? Like the person with the chainsaw, right? You do learn skills, and that's very helpful. And so I'm in favor of learning skills because you can do more. You give God more to work with. But this is something, the emotional part is so variable. And so I try to hold it gently. Thank you.
Thank you. And when I listened to you, I was thinking about my favorite quotation from Martin Luther. Because he describes grace as the grace to be taken out of your own perspective on yourself. So in Swedish, nåden att bli tagen ur sin egen åsyn. And that I think is like what you said, okay, this is where your thoughts are, and now let's be here instead, Karen. It's very freeing. And yet at the same time, I mean, it's at both ends, but also knowing yourself as loved or valued and prized. And maybe even a bit challenged, like, come on now. Do you really need to worry about whether you, I don't know, fill in the blank of, but the other thing, there's one thing that happened to me once, and this was a real depression. You know, I was really, really depressed, and in some ways content to stay there. Do you know that feeling where I'm just going to live here for a bit, because very little is, I don't care very much about things when I'm depressed. Do you know, I don't care, and to be lifted out of that and given joy, right? That, and to choose and to be brave enough, I suppose, or willing to actually walk away from that and to choose something that gives joy. That's also, you know, it lifts you out, but it, and I don't take credit for that. I mean, that is grace. Yeah. That is grace. And it, you know, it comes and goes. It's not, for me anyway, it's not a permanent state. But it is lovely, and I can go a long way on the memory. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this, and thank you for being here with us for the whole meeting.